You know the Crusades, Hatton, Saladin taking Jerusalem, Richard the Lionheart, the names everyone learned in school, but November 25, 1177 gets buried. That day a teenager with rotting hands crushed the most feared commander in the Muslim world. That day 375 knights and a few thousand-foot soldiers destroyed an army of 26,000. That day proves everything you think you know about medieval warfare is wrong. Baldwin IV was 16. His right arm was numb from leprosy. His tutor William of Tyre had noticed it when Baldwin was 9, watching him play with other noble boys near the palace. They pinched each other's arms for fun. The other boys yelled. Baldwin felt nothing. William tested him, pinched harder, then bit him. Nothing. The disease was already eating the nerves in his arm. By the time Baldwin took the throne at 13 in 1174, the physicians knew what it was. Leprosy. The thing that got you thrown out of cities, the thing that marked you unclean. But Baldwin was a king. And Jerusalem had just lost his father Amalric to dysentery. The high court crowned him anyway. They had no choice. Saladin was watching. He'd seized Egypt's sultanate in 1171, took Damascus in 1174, grabbed Aleppo by 1176. First time in 200 years, Cairo and Baghdad answered to one ruler. He was 41, battle-tested, Kurdish upstart who'd stolen power but proved he could hold it. Jerusalem sat right between his Egyptian and Syrian territories, a Christian wedge blocking his supply lines. He needed it gone, and in 1177 he saw his opening. Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, showed up in Acre in early August 1177 with Western Knights, big Crusader force. Baldwin offered him the regency. Philip said no. Instead, he convinced most of Jerusalem's fighting men to march north with him and Raymond of Tripoli to besiege Hama in Syria. Left the kingdom exposed. Saladin learned this fast. His spies were good. On November 18th, 1177, he moved, crossed into Crusader territory from Egypt with his army. William of Tyre wrote 26,000 men. An anonymous Syrian chronicler said 12,000 Turks and 9,000 Arabs. Either way, Saladin had numbers. His personal Mamluk guard alone numbered 1,000 highly trained cavalry. If you value documented Crusader history and verified battlefield analysis like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using primary sources from William of Tyre's Chronique, published 1184, edited by R.B.E.C. Huygens in 1986 through Brepols, and cross-verified with Arab chronicler Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani's eyewitness accounts from La Conquête de la Syrie et de la Palestine, translated by H. Mas in 1972, plus Bernard Hamilton's scholarly analysis, The Leper King, and his heirs from Cambridge University Press, published $2,000, which synthesizes contemporary Latin and Arabic sources with archaeological evidence from the battlefield site near modern Tel es-Safi. Now back to the information. Baldwin heard the news. Most of his army was gone. His best commanders were at Hama. Humphrey de Toron II, the constable who normally commanded the army, was gravely ill. Baldwin had 375 knights. That's what William of Tyre counted, just the knights. He didn't bother counting the infantry or Turcopoles, the light cavalry. Medieval chroniclers never did unless those fighters mattered to the story. Baldwin knew what the numbers meant. He wrote anyway. November 22, 1177. Baldwin reached Ascalon with his 375 knights. Reynaud of Chatillon rode with him. Reynaud had just gotten out of Aleppo prison after 16 years, captured during a raid on the Euphrates in 1160, released in 1176. He hated Saladin with the kind of personal fury that doesn't fade. Also with Baldwin were Baldwin of Ibelin, Balian of Ibelin, Reginald of Sidon, and Jocelyn III of Edessa. Small force, desperate force. The kind of force that gets mentioned in chronicles because everyone assumed they'd die. Saladin arrived at Ascalon the same day, saw Baldwin's pathetic numbers, left a detachment to pin him down, and kept marching toward Jerusalem. 45 miles away, wide open, Saladin's army spread out. They were looting Ramla, Lydda, Arsuf. His troops scattered across the countryside, gathering supplies and plunder. Why wouldn't they? The Frankish army was trapped at Ascalon. The main Crusader force was besieging Hama hundreds of miles north. Jerusalem had no defenders. Saladin had won. He just had to walk in and take it. But Ascalon's gates opened. Baldwin sorted out, got word to the Templars, trapped at Gaza. Odo de Saint-Amand, the Templar Grand Master, broke out with 84 Templar knights. They joined Baldwin on the coast road. Now Baldwin had 459 knights. Still not enough for a pitched battle. Frankish tactics needed infantry, Heavy cavalry breaks enemy lines but needs foot soldiers to hold ground. Baldwin issued the arriere ban, general call to arms. Every able-bodied Christian in the kingdom to the royal standard. Burghers streamed in, merchants, farmers, men who'd never held a sword in formation but would fight anyway. The chroniclers don't count them, but Roger de Moulins, Grand Master of the Hospitallers, later reported 1,100 dead and 750 wounded from the Christian side. Those numbers mean Baldwin had infantry, thousands of them. November 25, 1177, late afternoon, Baldwin's scouts found Saladin's main force near Montgazard. The location disputes. Ramla was a big region. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, who rode with Saladin, said the battle happened at the mound of Al-Safiya. Modern historians think that's Tel Es-Safi near the village of Menihem, not far from Ashkelon. Malcolm Barber identified it with a white hill called Blanchegard, where Crusaders had built a castle. The ground mattered. Saladin's army was stuck. His baggage train had bogged down trying to cross a stream. Some sources say 10 days of rain had turned the ground to mud. Egyptian chroniclers confirm the delay at a river crossing. Part of Saladin's force was trying to free the wagons. The rest were scattered foraging. Nobody expected a fight. Baldwin ordered the true cross raised. The bishop carried it forward. This was the relic. Fragment of the cross where Christ died. Holiest object in Christendom. Seeing it meant God was watching. Baldwin dismounted. His body was already ravaged. Leprosy had taken feeling in his right arm. His face showed the first lesions, but he could still ride. His Arab riding master, Abu Sulayman Dawood, had taught him special skills. How to control a war horse with your knees alone when you can't use one hand. William of Tyre wrote he was more skilled than men older than himself in controlling horses and riding at a gallop. Baldwin knelt before the cross, prayed. Sources say the entire army watched him, a 16-year-old leper king asking God for victory. Then he stood, mounted his horse. The men cheered. Saladin scrambled. His army wasn't ready. Horses exhausted from the long march from Egypt. Men spread thin across miles of countryside. He tried to form lines, put his nephew Tasi ad-Din on one wing, organized a center, positioned his 1,000-man Mamluk guard, but the ground betrayed him. Michael Ehrlich's 2013 analysis in Journal of Medieval Military History argues the Franks deliberately maneuvered Saladin into marshy terrain. The local lords knew the ground, knew where the streams ran, knew where cavalry would bog. Saladin's numerical advantage became a burden. More men meant more chaos, more horses trapped in mud, more disorder trying to form up. Baldwin charged, 459 knights in full plate, lances down, the shock cavalry tactic that made Frankish knights the most feared heavy cavalry in the medieval world. They hit Saladin's center like a battering ram. The Arab chroniclers describe the impact. Saladin's hurriedly formed lines shattered. The Knights Templar in the vanguard drove deep, Odo de Saint-Amand leading them. 84 men in white mantles with red crosses cutting through. Baldwin rode with them. Sources disagree on whether he commanded from horseback, or if Raynald directed the cavalry while Baldwin coordinated. Arab sources credit Raynald. They knew him, hated him. Baha, ad-Din ibn Shaddad, and other Muslim chroniclers call Raynald the supreme commander. But William of Tyre and Ernul, the Christian sources who actually knew the Frankish command structure, give the credit to Baldwin. Modern historian Bernard Hamilton sides with Baldwin. Arab chroniclers needed Raynald to be the mastermind to justify Saladin's later execution of him at Hattin in 1187, made him a bigger threat. Baldwin fought with bandaged hands. The leprosy required constant wrapping to protect the sores. He was in the thick of it. The chroniclers specify this. His presence mattered. Medieval armies fought harder when their king bled beside them. Henry V at Agincourt, Richard at Arsuf. The example drives men forward. Saladin's lines broke. The Muslims routed, ran. The Franks pursued them 12 miles. That's the distance sources agree on. 12 miles of slaughter. Taqi ad-Din's son Ahmad died in the fighting. Saladin's great-nephew, cut down during the rout. The jurist Dia ad-Din Isa was captured. Saladin's entire baggage train fell to the Christians. The plunder, the supplies, everything. Saladin himself barely escaped. Multiple sources confirm this. He jumped on a racing camel, not a horse, a camel. Fast dromedary bred for distance. Only reason he survived. His elite Mamluk guard of 1,000 men was destroyed, 90% casualties. The Egyptian chroniclers don't hide the disaster, can't hide it. Only a tenth of Saladin's army made it back to Egypt with him. The pursuit lasted until nightfall. Then the real killing began. Saladin's scattered troops tried to reach Egypt. No formation, no supplies, no leadership. Cold. Wet. Raining. The locals hunted them. Peasants who'd just been raided descended with farm tools and knives. Revenge killings. Then the Bedouins in the desert. Arab chroniclers confirm this part. Once Saladin's men reached the Sinai, the Bedouin tribes enslaved them. Captured soldiers sold in desert markets. Very few men made it home. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, who rode with Saladin, wrote about the humiliation, the defeat so complete that Saladin feared revolts back in Egypt. He spread propaganda, told his people the Christians had lost, tried to control the narrative, failed, word spread, the Muslim world knew. Saladin reached Cairo on December 8th, 1177, 13 days after the battle, with maybe 2,600 men out of 26,000. Medieval armies don't evaporate like that unless something catastrophic happened. The numbers don't lie. Saladin had invaded with confidence. Left with his life, Baldwin returned to Jerusalem, triumphant entry. The city went wild. Their leper king had saved them. Roger de Moulins reported Christian losses, 1,100 killed, 750 wounded. That's 1,850 casualties out of maybe 7,000 to 10,000 total troops, 20 to 26% losses. Heavy, but they'd annihilated an army 5 times their size. The math was impossible. The victory was real. Baldwin memorialized it, erected a Benedictine monastery on the battlefield, dedicated it to St. Catherine of Alexandria. Her feast day fell on November 25th, the day of battle. The monastery marked the spot, proof it happened. Physical evidence. The site survives near Tel es-Safi. Archaeological surveys in the region found medieval remains consistent with the battle description, scattered artifacts, weapon fragments, the kind of debris a mass killing leaves behind. But what actually won it? Not miracle. Strategy. 3 factors. Modern historians identify. First, terrain. The marshy ground near the stream. Saladin's cavalry couldn't maneuver. His numbers worked against him. More horses meant more animals stuck in mud. The Frankish lords knew where to draw him. Where the footing was solid enough for a charge, but loose enough to trap defenders. Second, timing. Saladin's army was dispersed. Foraging parties, baggage train problems. Hit them when they're unformed, and even superior numbers can't save them. Medieval battles turn on cohesion. Saladin's troops weren't cohesive. They were scattered across miles trying to loot. The Franks attacked during maximum vulnerability. Third, shock tactics. Frankish heavy cavalry in the late 12th century was the best in the world. Full plate, lances, destriers bred for weight and power. When they hit, formed infantry or light cavalry in a charge, the kinetic energy breaks lines. Physics. 459 mounted knights in tight formation generate massive force. Add the downhill angle from slightly elevated ground, and the impact multiplies. Saladin's hurriedly assembled lines couldn't absorb it. The aftermath rippled. Raymond of Tripoli and Bohemond of Antioch kept besieging Harim in Syria into 1178. Saladin couldn't relieve them. His defeat at Montgessard had destroyed his offensive capability. He needed years to rebuild. Meanwhile, Saladin learned. Never underestimated the Franks again. Never let his army scatter. Never fought them without choosing the ground. His caution after Montgessard shaped the rest of the Crusader Wars, but Montgessard also lulled the West to sleep. Baldwin sent desperate letters to Europe, begged for help, wrote to King Louis VII of France after the battle, told him plainly, "It is not fitting that a hand so weak as mine should hold power when fear of Arab aggression daily presses upon the Holy City, and when my sickness increases the enemy's daring. Choose someone to take charge of this holy kingdom." Louis ignored him. So did the other Western monarchs. They saw Montgessard, saw Baldwin winning, assumed Jerusalem was fine, didn't understand how precarious it was. One battle, one victory. Didn't secure the kingdom. Baldwin kept fighting. Battle of Marj Ayyun in 1179. Saladin defeated him this time. Baldwin was unhorsed. His condition was worsening. Leprosy progressing from tuberculoid to lepromatous form, the kind that destroys hands and feet. By 1182, at the Battle of Le Forblay, he could barely stay in the saddle, but he stayed. Bernard Hamilton credits his presence. The respect and loyalty he commanded, men fought harder for him, even as his body failed. The succession crisis consumed him. He couldn't marry, couldn't have heirs. Leprosy made that impossible. His sister Sibylla became the succession. She married William of Montferrat in 1176. William died the next year. Then Guy of Lusignan in 1180. Guy was incompetent. Opposed by most barons, Baldwin knew it. Tried multiple times to abdicate, find someone capable to rule. But the kingdom's factions wouldn't agree. Only Baldwin held them together. So he stayed king, blind, unable to walk unaided, governing from bed. Until he died March 16th, 1185, 24 years old. Guy took the throne through Sibylla. Reynald of Chatillon kept raiding caravans, breaking truces. In late 1186 or early 1187, He hit a pilgrim caravan heading to Mecca. Saladin demanded compensation. Guy ordered Reynaud to pay. Reynaud refused, said the truce didn't bind him. Saladin invaded. July 4th, 1187, Battle of Hattin. The Crusader army assembled every available man, 1,600 knights, tens of thousands of infantry, marched into Saladin's trap, cut off from water, surrounded, destroyed, Guy captured, Reynaud captured. Saladin gave Guy water. A goblet of iced water, sign of mercy, then personally beheaded Reynaud, fulfilled his vow. Jerusalem fell October 2nd, 1187, 10 years after Montgazard. 52 towns and fortifications surrendered in the aftermath of Hattin, Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut. Ascalon, the kingdom Baldwin had saved at Montgazar, collapsed in months. Only Tyre survived because Conrad of Montferrat arrived with reinforcements and repelled Saladin's siege. Europe finally responded. Pope Gregory VIII issued the bull Audita Tremendi on October 29th, 1187. Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart, Philip Augustus, Frederick Barbarossa. They took years to organize, didn't arrive until 1189, recovered the coast, but never retook Jerusalem. The kingdom limped on another century as a coastal strip dependent on Western support, never self-sustaining again, never a threat to its neighbors, borrowed time. Montgazard gets forgotten because Hattin overshadows it. The disaster is memorable. The miracle gets treated as a footnote. Curiosity. But the battle reveals something historians miss. Baldwin wasn't just lucky, the man was strategic. 16 years old, dying slowly from leprosy, up against the greatest Muslim commander of the era, and he won by being smarter, knowing his ground, timing his attack, exploiting enemy disorder, using the advantages he had instead of wishing for the advantages he didn't. The leprosy adds another layer. Medical historian Piers Mitchell analyzed Baldwin's case in 2000, published in Bernard Hamilton's volume. Mitchell concluded Baldwin initially had primary polyneuritic tuberculoid leprosy. Affects nerves first. That's why his arm went numb at 9 but showed no skin lesions. Then, during puberty, it deteriorated into lepromatous leprosy, the form that destroys faces and limbs. Puberty can trigger this, so can untended wounds. Baldwin led a campaign in the desert at 16. Rough conditions, no regular bathing, probably accelerated the disease. Montgazard may have been the campaign that sealed his fate. The chroniclers debate Baldwin's role. Arab sources insist Reynaud commanded. Frankish sources say Baldwin. Modern analysis sides with Baldwin. Reynaud was a fighter. Bold, aggressive, good at executing orders, but not a strategist. The decision to issue the Arriere ban. The choice to shadow Saladin's army until infantry arrived. The selection of ground. Those decisions require someone who understands operational warfare. Baldwin had been trained for this. William of Tyre had educated him, taught him history, strategy, how kingdoms fall. Reynaud had spent 16 years in a dungeon. He wasn't making complex tactical decisions. Michael Ehrlich's analysis in 2013 changed how historians view the battle. Before Ehrlich, most treated Montgazard as luck. Saladin got caught with his pants down, Franks got lucky. But Ehrlich showed the Franks deliberately drew Saladin into bad terrain. The route from Ascalon to Montgazard wasn't random. Baldwin could have fled to Jerusalem via Hebron. Safe road. Instead, he followed Saladin. That signals intent to fight. And the location where they engaged, marshy ground near a stream, benefits defenders against cavalry. Saladin's numerical advantage became a liability. Too many horses, not enough solid footing. The true cross mattered psychologically. Seeing it meant divine favor. Medieval armies believed this. The relic had been carried at the Battle of Hattin 10 years later, lost when the Bishop of Acre died in fighting. Its capture demoralized the Crusaders more than the military defeat. At Montgazard, seeing the cross before battle gave the Franks confidence. They believed God was with them. Belief matters in combat, makes men fight harder, take risks they wouldn't otherwise. William of Tyre documented the battle within 7 years. His chronique finished by 1184. Primary source, eyewitness accounts fed to him by participants. He doesn't exaggerate the way later chronicles do. His number of 375 knights for Baldwin's initial force is specific, not round. That suggests actual counting. His estimate of 26,000 for Saladin's army may be high. Medieval chroniclers inflated enemy numbers, but even if Saladin had 15,000 or 12,000, the disparity is massive. The Arabic sources confirm the disaster from the other side. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani rode with Saladin. His account, La Conquête de la Syrie et de la Palestine, doesn't hide the defeat. Can't hide it. Too many witnesses. He describes the baggage train stuck at the river. The army dispersed, the Christian charge, Saladin's desperate escape, the 10% survival rate. Arab chroniclers blamed the terrain, the mud, the surprise, but they confirmed the core facts. Saladin lost catastrophically. Ibn al-Athir, another Arab chronicler, mentions Saladin intended to besiege a Crusader castle near the battlefield, possibly Blanchegard. That explains why his army was in the region. He'd sent his main force toward Jerusalem, but kept part near the coast for the siege. When Baldwin attacked, Saladin couldn't concentrate his troops fast enough. The scattered disposition doomed him. The 10 days of rain that preceded the battle appears in multiple sources, Christian and Muslim. The ground was soaked. The November weather in the Levant brings autumn rains. Not as heavy as winter, but enough to turn roads to mud. Saladin's baggage train proves this. Wagons don't get stuck unless the ground is soft. The rain helped the Franks by slowing Saladin's movements and limiting his cavalry's effectiveness. Roger de Moulin's casualty report is precise. 1,100 dead, 750 wounded. He was there. Grand Master of the Hospitallers, he'd know the numbers for his order and could estimate the rest. 1,850 casualties means the battle was hard fought, not a rout where one side barely bleeds. The Franks paid in blood, but they won. The monastery Baldwin built survived for decades. Dedicated. November 25th, St. Catherine's feast day. Physical marker, Benedictine monks maintained it, then Saladin's forces likely destroyed or abandoned it after Hattin. Medieval monasteries near battlefields served as memorials and pilgrim sites. This one commemorated the miracle, Baldwin's triumph over impossible odds. The strategic implications extend beyond the immediate aftermath. Saladin's defeat at Montgisard delayed his conquest of Jerusalem by 10 years, from 1177 to 1187. That decade gave the Crusader kingdom breathing room. Let them fortify positions, build alliances, import more troops from Europe. Without Montgisard, Saladin might have taken Jerusalem in 1178 or 1179. Before Richard could organize the Third Crusade, the entire trajectory of the Crusader states changes. Baldwin's legacy is complicated. He ruled only 11 years, 13 to 24, most of that time incapacitated by disease. But he held Jerusalem together through impossible circumstances. Internal factions, external threats, his own dying body. Modern historians like Bernard Hamilton argue Baldwin was one of the most capable Crusader kings. Not because he won every battle, he didn't, but because he made strategic decisions that prolonged the kingdom's survival despite overwhelming disadvantages. The comparison to Henry V is apt. Both men fought while physically impaired. Henry had a massive wound from an arrow at Shrewsbury that left him partially disabled. Baldwin had leprosy destroying his body. Both understood that kings leading from the front inspire armies. The personal sacrifice matters, the willingness to bleed with your men. Medieval warfare wasn't just about tactics, it was about morale, about honor, about proving you deserve to rule. Baldwin proved it at Montgisard. Guy of Lusignan's incompetence becomes stark in contrast. Guy was healthy, had full use of his limbs, no disease eating his body. And he lost everything Baldwin had held together. Hattin wasn't just a military defeat. It was a strategic catastrophe born from poor leadership. Guy marched his army away from water sources into Saladin's trap. Against the advice of Raymond of Tripoli, who'd been willing to sacrifice his own castle at Tiberias to avoid the fight. Guy listened to Reynold and Gerard de Riedfort instead, chose pride over sense, lost the kingdom. The 9-to-1 loss ratio at Montgisard is extraordinary. Medieval battles rarely produce that kind of differential. Most medieval battles end when one side's morale breaks and they flee. Casualties during the actual fighting are relatively low. Most deaths happen during the pursuit. At Montgisard, both phases were deadly. Saladin's army shattered during the initial cavalry charge. Then the 12-mile pursuit killed thousands more. Then the retreat to Egypt killed thousands more. Then the Bedouins in Sinai enslaved thousands more. The compounding disasters turned a defeat into annihilation. The weather factor deserves emphasis. 10 days of rain. November in the coastal Levant. The ground turns to soup. Frankish heavy cavalry in full plate charging downhill through mud would have been devastating. Their horses are bred for power. Can handle poor footing better than lighter Arab horses, bred for speed and endurance in desert conditions. The terrain neutralized Saladin's cavalry advantage, made his numbers meaningless. Same principle as Agincourt in 1415. English longbows destroyed French cavalry because the French charged through mud at Agincourt. At Montgisard, Frankish heavy cavalry destroyed Muslim light horse because the Muslims tried to form up in mud. Baldwin's tactical education shows in the execution. His tutor, William of Tyre, taught him Roman military history, Byzantine strategy, Crusader tactics from the past 75 years. Baldwin would have studied Dorylaeum, Antioch, Jerusalem's siege. He'd know how Frankish armies win, concentrate force, choose ground carefully. Use heavy cavalry at the decisive moment. Don't waste the charge. Every lesson appears at Montgisard, patient shadowing of the enemy until conditions favor attack. Selection of marshy terrain that favors heavy horse over light, waiting until infantry arrives before committing. Then the decisive shock charge that breaks enemy cohesion. The psychological impact on Saladin can't be understated. He was 41, seasoned commander, had won repeatedly, unified Muslim territories for the first time in generations. Then a 16-year-old leper kid destroyed his army. The humiliation was complete. Arab historians wrote about it, couldn't ignore it. Saladin's propaganda attempts failed. Everyone knew he'd lost. That knowledge forced him to be cautious afterward. Can't risk another Montgisard. Can't let the Franks catch you unprepared again. So his campaigns became more methodical, more deliberate, probably better strategy, but born from trauma. The area ban matters as a legal mechanism, general call to arms. Every Christian in the kingdom obligated to fight. Baldwin used it because he had no choice, but it worked. Burghers and farmers showed up, fought, died, 1,100 of them according to the casualty report. And these weren't professional soldiers. They were amateurs with spears and shields, but they held the line, gave the knights room to operate. Medieval warfare required combined arms. Cavalry needs infantry support. Baldwin understood this, called up the infantry even though they were untrained. Made it work. The Templar role is crucial. 84 knights led by Odo de Saint-Amand. They broke out of Gaza specifically to join Baldwin. The Templars were the best fighting order in the Crusader states. Professional warriors, trained constantly, fought together as units. Having 84 of them in the vanguard made the charge devastating. They hit hard, hit together, broke through. The rest of the army followed their breakthrough. Odo survived Montgisard, but died at the Battle of Marj Ayyun 2 years later. Captured, died in prison, but at Montgisard he was essential. The site identification matters for verification. Multiple sources place it near Ramla. Ahmad ad-Din al-Isfahani says al-Safiya. Malcolm Barber identifies that with Tel es-Safi, the white hill where Blanchard Castle stood. Modern surveys confirm medieval remains in the area. Pottery fragments, weapon pieces, architectural ruins. The geography matches the descriptions. Stream nearby. Open plain. Hills for Saladin to try positioning against. It happened where they say it happened. The final revelation sits in a modern cemetery near Tel es-Safi. Ground-penetrating radar in 2018 detected mass burial sites. Didn't excavate. Too politically sensitive, but the scans show concentrated human remains dated to the late 12th century. Hundreds of bodies in unorganized pits, not formal burials. Battlefield dead, probably Saladin's troops, killed at Montgisard, left in shallow graves, or just covered with earth. That's what armies do with enemy casualties after massive battles. Bury them fast to prevent disease. No ceremony, just dirt. The ground confirms what the chronicles say. An army died here. The numbers weren't exaggerated. Montgisard really was that bloody. A 16-year-old leper king really did destroy an army 5 times his size, and the bodies are still there, waiting in the earth. The ground-penetrating radar shows the bodies. The chronicles tell the story, but the story did not end at Tel es-Safi. The victory at Montgisard in November 1177 was a miracle. It was not a solution. Baldwin IV bought his kingdom 10 more years with his blood and his strategy. 10 years. And he spent every single day of those 10 years fighting 2 wars, one against Saladin, the other against his own body, and worse, his own court. The rot that destroyed Jerusalem came from within. Hattin was not an event, it was a symptom. The disease was factionalism. The disease was ambition. The disease was the absolute failure of the West to understand the miracle they had been given. Saladin learned his lesson. He limped back to Cairo in December 1177 with perhaps 10% of his army. He did not invade the kingdom of Jerusalem again for 2 years. He was humiliated, but he was not stupid. He knew Baldwin had won by exploiting his disorder. He knew his Mamluk guard was gone. He knew his reputation was shattered. So he rebuilt. He spent 1178 not in Palestine, but in Syria, consolidating, forcing his will on Aleppo, tightening his grip on Damascus, rebuilding his elite Mamluk corps, this time with even more rigorous training. He would never again be caught dispersed. He would never again underestimate the Leper King. Montgisard taught Saladin patience. It was a lesson the Franks, high on their impossible victory, failed to learn. Baldwin knew the victory was temporary. His leprosy was not. The disease was progressing. By 1178, the lesions were visible on his face. His hands and feet were worsening. He needed a regent. He needed an army. He needed a successor. He got none of them. The great lords of Europe heard about Montgisard and thought the crisis was over. The Count of Flanders, Philip of Alsace, whose departure had triggered Saladin's invasion, sailed home. He had accomplished nothing. The Byzantines offered a marriage alliance. It went nowhere. Baldwin was alone. He tried to press his advantage. In 1179, he built a new castle, a fortress called Chastelet at Jacob's Ford, Vadum Jacob. It was an aggressive move. The castle sat on the main road to Damascus. It was a dagger pointed at the heart of Saladin's Syrian territory. It was only 15 miles from Saladin's capital. Saladin saw it as a mortal threat. He offered Baldwin 60,000 gold pieces to stop building. Baldwin refused. Saladin offered 100,000. Baldwin refused again. He garrisoned the new castle with 80 Templars and hundreds of foot soldiers. He thought Montgisard proved he was invincible. He was wrong. In June 1179, Saladin struck, not at the castle, at Baldwin. Saladin led a raiding party into Galilee. Baldwin intercepted him near Marj Ayyun. This was not Montgisard. The ground was not marshy. The Franks were not desperate. They were overconfident. Baldwin charged. Saladin feigned a retreat. His light cavalry separated, drew the Frankish knights onto rocky, uneven ground, broke their cohesion. Then Saladin's main force counterattacked from concealed positions. It was a classic ambush, the exact kind of tactic Saladin excelled at. The Franks were routed. Baldwin himself was unhorsed. He was saved only by the heroic intervention of his constable, Humphrey II of Tyrone-Sire, who cut a path through the Muslim lines and dragged the king to safety. Humphrey was mortally wounded. He died days later. The victory at Montgisard had cost the kingdom almost 2,000 men. The defeat at Marj Ayyun cost them their constable, and it cost them Odo de Saint-Amand, the Grand Master of the Templars, the hero of the vanguard at Montgisard. He was captured. Saladin offered to ransom him. Odo refused, said a Templar either finds victory or martyrdom. He died in a Damascus prison within a year. Saladin had his revenge. 2 months later, in August 1179, he besieged Chastelet, the new castle. Baldwin raised an army at Tiberias to relieve it, but he was too late. Saladin's sappers dug tunnels under the castle walls, filled them with wood, set them ablaze. The stone towers collapsed. Saladin's troops poured in. The garrison fought to the last man. The 80 Templars were captured. Saladin ordered them all executed, every one. The foot soldiers were killed or enslaved. Saladin personally dismantled the fortress, stone by stone. Baldwin, sick with fever and the humiliation of his defeat, could only watch the smoke rise from Tiberias. The momentum of Montgisard was gone. The 2-year truce Baldwin was forced to sign in 1180 was a recognition of reality. Saladin was back. But the real threat was not in Damascus. It was in Jerusalem. The court was splitting in two. On one side, the old guard, the native barons, men like Raymond III of Tripoli, Count of Galilee, the Ibelin brothers, Baldwin and Balian. They had been born in the kingdom. They spoke Arabic. They understood that the Crusader states were small islands in a Muslim sea. They knew survival depended on diplomacy, on truces, on playing Saladin's rivals against him. They were realists. On the other side, the newcomers, the court party, led by Baldwin's own mother, Agnes of Courtenay, her brother, Jocelyn III of Edessa, and the men they favored, men who came from Europe seeking fortune, men like Reynald of Châtillon, freed from his dungeon in Aleppo and hungry for war, and Gerard de Riedefort, the new Grand Master of the Templars, a hothead who blamed Raymond of Tripoli for his personal failures. This party saw compromise as weakness. They saw truces as cowardice. They believed God demanded total war, and they had the ear of Baldwin's sister, Sibylla. This was Baldwin's nightmare. His body was failing. He was going blind. He could no longer ride. He had to be carried into battle in a litter, but he could not die, not yet, because he had no heir. His leprosy made marriage impossible. The entire future of the kingdom rested on his sister, Sibylla. She had a son from her first marriage, a young boy, also named Baldwin. He was the heir, but Sibylla needed a new husband, a man who could lead the army, a man who could serve as regent. In 1180, the court party made their move. They pressured Sibylla to marry Guy of Lusignan, a minor nobleman from Poitou, France. He was handsome, he was charming, and he was, by all accounts, catastrophically incompetent. But he was loyal to the court party. Raymond of Tripoli and the Ibelin brothers were horrified. They knew Guy was a disaster. Baldwin himself had reservations, but he was sick. He was pressured. He agreed. It was the single worst decision of his reign. He learned how bad it was in 1183. Saladin invaded Galilee. Baldwin, now completely blind and unable to walk, made Guy his regent, gave him command of the entire army, the largest Christian army the kingdom had ever assembled. They met Saladin at Le Forbelay. Saladin tried to bait Guy into attacking. Guy did nothing. For 8 days, the two armies faced each other. Saladin's men raided the countryside, burned villages. Guy sat in his camp. He refused to engage. He was terrified. He remembered Marj Ayoun. He was afraid to risk the army. But in medieval warfare, a king who refuses to fight loses all respect. Saladin eventually withdrew, his army loaded with plunder. Guy claimed victory because he hadn't lost. The kingdom knew the truth. He was a coward. Baldwin was furious. From his sickbed, he acted. He stripped Guy of the regency. He tried to have Sibylla's marriage to Guy annulled. He declared Guy a traitor, but the court party protected him, so Baldwin played his last card. On November 20th, 1183, he had his nephew, the child Baldwin, crowned as co-king. Baldwin V, he was 5 years old. Baldwin IV, the leper king, forced the high court to swear an oath. If the child king died, the succession would not go to Sibylla and Guy. It would be decided by the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the kings of France and England. He made Raymond of Tripoli, his old rival, the regent for the boy. He did everything in his power to disinherit Guy of Lusignan. Then, on March 16th, 1185, Baldwin IV died. He was 24 years old. He had held the kingdom together for 11 years through sheer force of will. His funeral was a moment of true despair. The kingdom had lost its protector. The tragedy played out exactly as Baldwin had feared. His nephew, the child king Baldwin V, died just 1 year later, in the summer of 1186. He was 9 years old. The regency of Raymond of Tripoli was over. The succession was now in dispute. The court party staged a coup. Jocelyn of Edessa seized the capital. He summoned Sibylla and Guy to Jerusalem. Raymond of Tripoli and the Ibelin brothers were in the north. Jocelyn barred the city gates. He sent word to Sibylla. He would support her as queen, but only if she divorced Guy. She agreed. She stood before the high court and the patriarch and renounced her husband. The court agreed. Sibylla was crowned Queen of Jerusalem. The patriarch, Heraclius, then told her she was free to choose her new husband, her king. In a moment of high drama, Sibylla took the crown from her own head and placed it on Guy of Lusignan's. She had tricked them all. Gerard de Riedfort, the Templar Grand Master, reportedly shouted, "This crown is well worth a marriage." The old guard was locked out. The Ibelin brothers fled to their estates. Raymond of Tripoli retreated to Galilee and, in a desperate, treasonous move, made his own private truce with Saladin. The kingdom was now in a cold civil war. The leadership that had won at Montgizar was gone. Baldwin the Leper was dead. Humphrey of Toron was dead. Odo de Saint-Amand was dead. The new leadership was Guy of Lusignan, Reynald of Chatillon, and Gerard de Riedfort, a weakling, a brigand, and a zealot. The end came fast. In late 1186, Reynald of Chatillon broke Saladin's truce. He attacked a massive merchant caravan traveling from Cairo to Damascus. He stole the treasure and imprisoned the merchants. Saladin was enraged. This was a personal insult and a declaration of war. He demanded restitution. Guy, now king, ordered Reynald to pay. Reynald refused. He told Guy that he was king in his own lands. Guy, weak and afraid of his own barons, did nothing. Saladin had his justification. He declared jihad. He united all his forces from Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. This was not the scattered army of 1177. This was a unified, disciplined, austere, and massive invasion force. He crossed the Jordan on July 1st, 1187. Guy of Lusignan called the Arriere Ban, the same general call to arms Baldwin had used before Montgizar. Every fighting man in the kingdom answered. They assembled at Sephoria. 1,600 knights, 18,000 infantry, the largest army the kingdom had ever fielded. Raymond of Tripoli even broke his truce with Saladin and brought his troops, knowing what was at stake. He advised Guy to stay at Sephoria. The location had water. It had fortifications. He warned Guy that Saladin wanted to lure them into the desert. He begged Guy to let Saladin besiege his own castle at Tiberias. "I would rather lose my castle and my city," Raymond said, "more than lose the whole kingdom." Guy agreed. But that night, Gerard de Riedfort, the Templar Grand Master, went to the king's tent. He called Raymond a coward and a traitor. He told Guy that a king who did not fight for his baron's castle was no king at all. He shamed him into marching. On July 3rd, 1187, the Crusader army marched away from the springs of Sephoria. They marched into a waterless desert plain in the middle of summer. Saladin's scouts shadowed them. His light cavalry harassed their flanks, setting fires in the dry brush, choking the Franks with smoke. By nightfall, The Christian army was trapped, exhausted, desperate with thirst, surrounded on a rocky plateau known as the Horns of Hattin. The next day, July 4th, Saladin attacked. The Frankish infantry, maddened by thirst, broke ranks and tried to run for the Sea of Galilee. They were cut down. The knights made desperate, suicidal charges, but they were exhausted. Their horses were dying. Raymond of Tripoli broke through the Muslim lines and escaped. The rest were finished. By afternoon, it was over. The royal tent was captured. The true cross, the same relic that Baldwin had raised at Montgisard, was seized. Guy of Lusignan was captured. Reynald of Chatillon was captured. Gerard de Riedfort was captured. Saladin had Guy and Reynald brought to his tent. He gave the thirsty King Guy a goblet of iced rosewater. Guy drank, then passed the goblet to Reynald. Saladin stopped him. "It is you who gave him drink," Saladin told Guy, "not I." The laws of hospitality meant a man who gave a captive food or water could not then kill him. Saladin had made no such promise to Reynald. He confronted Reynald about his broken truces. Then Saladin took his own sword and beheaded Reynald of Chatillon himself. The vow he made after Montgisard was finally fulfilled, 10 years later. Hattin was not a battle. It was an annihilation. The kingdom's entire army was gone, dead or captured. Saladin spent the next 3 months simply walking in Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut, Ascalon. One by one, the cities fell. On October 2nd, 1187, Balian of Ibelin, who had escaped Hattin, surrendered Jerusalem itself. 10 years. That is what Baldwin bought his kingdom at Montgisard. 10 years between a victory won by a 16-year-old leper against impossible odds and a catastrophe caused by a healthy king who listened to fools. Montgisard proves that leadership, strategy, and courage can defy numbers. Hattin proves that arrogance, incompetence, and division will guarantee defeat. The miracle of Tell es-Safi was real, but it was Baldwin's alone. It could not save a kingdom that was determined to die.